Hey everyone, this video is part 6 of the Build a Website from Scratch series. In this video, we're going to be building out the blog post articles section, and we'll be using CSS Grid to make the layout responsive. If you want to start watching the series from the very beginning, click up here to see part 1. Otherwise, let's get into it. Alright, let's build out the latest articles section. Now, per the usual, before we do any actual coding, we're going to look at the design, which I have open here in Adobe XD, and let's go down to that articles section. You can see that it is 4 columns on desktop and 1 column on mobile, and we'll probably do 2 columns for tablet. Now, if you saw the previous video where we built out this featured section just above it, it has basically the same layout. They're both 4 columns on desktop, 1 column on mobile. And I'd mentioned last time that while we were going to build the features section using flexbox, for the article section, we're going to use CSS Grid. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to build out this 4-column layout using CSS Grid as opposed to flexbox. And honestly, I think that you could use either flexbox or grid for both of these sections. I don't think either one of them has a super strong advantage over the other. So this is one of those cases where you can just pick whichever you are more comfortable with. All right, now that we've looked at the design, let's start getting into the code. So we're going to go into VS Code, our code editor, and if you've been following along, you might notice that my color scheme are slightly different. I've been trying to tweak this customization in VS Code for a bit, and hopefully when everything's done, I will be able to release it as an actual theme so you can all download it for free. But for now, it's still a work in progress. Okay, now to get started, we are going to look at the index.html and we're going to add our HTML markup. So the first thing we're going to do is, similar to the other sections, we're going to add a section tag. So we'll say section, and we'll give it a class of maybe articles. And I know that I ended up making the section for the feature section feature singular as opposed to plural, but I'm going to try, I think, maybe a slightly different approach for the articles. Now the section tag is going to be what's going to be full width on desktop. Inside the section tag, we're going to add a child element, which has the container class that we've been using. And if we look at the features section again, we see there's a feature __ content with some container classes. And we're going to use those same ones down in the article section. So let's add that now. So add a div just by doing that dot for the class shortcut. And we'll say article singular __. Let's say content. And we'll probably give it the same container, actually container dot container dash pal, which is the class for padding all, meaning it'll add the padding all the way around on each of the 4 sides. Then in the article content, I think what we want to do is, let's see what I did for the previous thing. Okay, yes, so we're using an h2 tag for the intro section, and then we'll add probably the same article grid type of thing. So we'll say class article. Actually, let me look at the design. So there's actually no like intro paragraph like the feature section, so it just has that h2. So I think I can get away with just writing h2, and then we'll copy the text over. Latest articles. Then under the h2, we'll add another div and we'll say article grid. And then in the article grid, that's going to be our CSS Grid parent element. So then we'll add the child elements. We'll say article, I like to just say item for grid items, whether it's Flexbox or CSS Grid. So each article is going to have a wrapper of article item. Now, going back to the design again, we can see that in each article item, there's an image on top, and then there is some sort of text content below that. So you can kind of break this up into 2 different sections. So what I'm going to do is say, in the article item, we'll say article __ image. And then below that, we'll do article __, and maybe I'll say text. And that's going to contain all the text in the article. The reason I'm wrapping all the text in one div, article text, is because of this padding all the way around. So if I didn't add the article text, I would have to basically add the left and right padding to each individual text element, and then I would have to add the top and bottom padding or margin, whichever one you want, to the first and last element. So I personally think in this case, it's just simpler to wrap all the text in one div element and then add a padding all the way around. There's just a little bit less coding involved. Okay, so we got the article image. And when you have an image, you always have to ask yourself, all right, do I want to use an image tag or do I want to use a background image? And one way you can sort of help figure out which approach is better is, if we look at the design, let's take this dollar image, and maybe I'll just delete this. I don't really need that rectangle. So if we look at the dollar image, you can see that it's the same image, of course, but the cropping is a little bit different between desktop and mobile. So here it's more squarish. And if you look at the mobile, you can see that the right edge goes just out a little bit farther. It kind of cuts off on desktop right at the corner of that one bill. And the same goes for the left side. You can see that cuts off here, and it's a little bit longer on the left side as well. So that kind of tells me that I probably want to use a background image for the image element. That way you can crop it to different sizes and you're not going to adjust the size of the image or make it look kind of weird. So in that case, for the article image, there's not going to be any actual content, but I will add the background image using background image URL. And then we need to add the URL, of course, of the image. So if we go into our images folder, it's going to be one of these. It's probably going to be one of these image files here. So the first one's going to be image currency JPEG. So we'll add that in. So we'll start off with / images and then image - currency. And I hope that, is that right? Yeah, the images folder is not in the app folder, but it's in its own folder. Image currency.jpg. Then let's add the markup for the text. So if you look at the text item, there is first an author section, then there's a title of the blog post, and then there's either a description or a summary. You can call this anything you want. So let's write the markup. So it's going to be author, title, and then description. So I'll say article, author, title, description. Okay, and then we'll just kind of copy those over as well. And there is an ellipsis at the end of that description just because it's a shortened blurb. So we'll just copy over that ellipsis symbol as well. Okay, now we add a space here just to kind of differentiate the item from the grid itself. There we go. There we go. And let's see, there's one more thing that we probably want to do, and that is when you have a grid like this, if it's for blog posts or whatever, it's usually going to be a link. And there's no, read more link in the design. So what I'm going to do is make the entire item an anchor link. And that's usually, I think, the preferred way of doing it, because even if you hover over the image, you'd like to be able to click over to the blog post itself anywhere you click on this section. So I think what I can do is article item, I'm going to make that an anchor link. And then we'll add href, and of course it's not going anywhere, so we'll just say pound. Okay, so I think we got all the markup that we need. I'm just going to do the styles just for this first article item, just to make sure everything's correct. Then once everything's been kind of set and we know that it's correct, then once we figure out all the styles for this, we can copy it for the additional 3 items. So to start off with the styles, in our SCSS folder, I'm going to create a new file. We'll call it article.scss. And of course, since we created a new SAS file, we need to import it. So we'll say import article. All right, so we should be adding the article SAS file to the watch. Now, let me scoot this over to the other side. So the first thing we want to do is remember we made the section tag have the class of articles. So I'll add some styles for that just in case we need it. And then we'll add article. So we'll add content, grid, item. So I'm just copying all the classes that I created in the index.html file over to the SAS file. So image, text, author, title, and description. And I may delete this if we don't end up writing any styles for it, but I think we'll be okay. All right, going back to the design, we need to figure out what the background color of this is. And it's very faint, but it seems like the blog posts themselves are white, and then this background is a very light gray. So it's probably the same as what we had in the hero section. So that's going to be a style rule for the articles section tag. So background color, and if we look in our variable SAS file, it's probably going to be this very light gray color here. So we'll do that. And then let's see how that looks. There we go. So here's what we got so far. We can see that because I did make the article item an anchor link, it has that purple link text, and it's turning into the hand when you hover over it. But it does look like the background color is correct, so I think that is just fine for now. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is let's get the CSS Grid stuff working. So for article grid, I want to set, let's just say display grid for all widths, even mobile, just to do it that way. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start writing the styles for CSS Grid. Now, even though mobile is just one column, I think I'm still going to do display grid for mobile and then also tablet and desktop, just to see if that's, a good way of approaching this. So we'll turn on grid with display grid. Now, unlike flexbox, if you write display grid just by itself with no other styles, nothing is going to visibly happen. And that is because for grid, you need to not only set grid, display grid, but you also need to start creating your template. This is one of the core differences between flexbox and grid. Flexbox is more of a content first approach. So once you turn on flexbox for the flex parent, it's going to just try to fit all the flex child items on the same row by default. For grid, you need to set up the template, meaning you need to set up the number and the size of the columns and or rows in the layout. So for our layout, it's a 4-column layout for desktop, 2-column tablet, 1-column mobile. So since mobile is just 1 column, we'll say grid template columns, and we just want 1 column. So we'll say 1 FR, and FR is a fractional unit. It's kind of a general ratio unit used for CSS Grid, meaning it will take up as much space as possible. And if there's more than 1 child item in the column or the row, it'll sort of divide the space up between those child items, depending on the number. So 1 FR is kind of the default, auto kind of width. So mobile just has 1 column. Now let's add the grid template for tablet. So we'll use our mixin that we wrote, breakpoint dash up. And for medium widths, we're going to say grid. And you can actually abbreviate it. If you just type in GTC, it has this really cool IntelliSense, and it'll automatically detect. So for tablet, we want 2 columns. So we're going to use the repeat function. This is super handy for grid. So repeat takes 2 parameters. The first one is going to be how many columns you want to use. We want 2. So then you say 2, comma, and then again, we'll say 1 FR. So this will basically create a layout that has 2 columns and they will each be the same width, 1 fractional unit. Lastly, we'll do desktop styles. So breakpoint up, large, and then again we'll say GTC, and instead of 2, we'll say 4. So 4, 1 FR. So this is just your sort of standard run-of-the-mill grid where you have a multi-column layout for different, and the number changes based on your device width. So let's see what this looks like right now. Okay. Oh, this is interesting. So instead of taking up the full width, you can see that this article is taking up only part of the width. And that's because we set 4 columns in that grid template. So if we look at article grid, I'm using Firefox, and they have a really helpful tool. If you click on the layout tab and we expand grid. So it detects that this is a grid item because, you know, it has display grid. So if I check this box, it's actually going to create lines. It'll number the different columns and rows in the template that we made. So remember, we just created a 4-column layout in this grid thing. So it's showing us the 4 columns in the grid template. So if we added more items, it would populate this grid. So let's actually do that now. I'm guessing the markup is probably okay. So we'll take this, we'll duplicate it 1, 2, 3 times, save, and go back to our browser. So now we can see that the 4 columns are actually working, which is pretty cool. Let's see how this looks on tablet. So we'll reduce the width and it went to 2 columns and then 1 column for mobile. So with just a few rules, we've already sort of created our grid layout, which is pretty cool. So for CSS Grid, the approach that we used is a very sort of responsive design approach, meaning we're using media queries to change the grid template and change the number of columns. There is another approach that you can use with grid that is more intrinsic design, meaning you don't have to use all these media queries because there are some built-in properties that can sort of figure out and adjust how the layout actually looks depending on the width of your browser. So I'm just going to show you one of those now, and then I'll explain why I actually prefer this method with the media queries. Let's just comment out everything except display grid. So Control K, Control C, we'll comment that out in VS Code. And what you could do is, for your grid template columns property, we can use something called auto fit, and then also another function called min-max. And I'll explain what each of those is once we write out this rule. So if you look down in the desktop rule that we had previously, it said grid template columns, and then it used the repeat function. We're going to do something similar here. So we're going to say repeat, but instead of writing an actual number like 4 or 2, we're going to say auto fit. And this is a property that sort of lets Grid decide how many columns are going to actually be on the website, which is pretty cool, right? You don't have to say 2 or 4. It'll sort of decide for you. And then for the width of each column, we're going to use min-max. So instead of saying, you know, I want this column to be 200 pixels wide or 1 FR or 2 FRs, we can sort of, again, give the grid itself basically the control over how wide things will be, as well as how many columns are going to be on the row. So min-max, as the name kind of sounds, you give it a minimum and then you give it a maximum width in the parameters. So the minimum width, we're going to say, let's go back to the design really quick. And this square, so this is about 200 pixels wide. So we'll say that for the minimum, we'll say about 200 pixels, maybe a little wider. Let's say 230 perhaps. And usually I should convert that to rems. So let's do that. Open the calculator, and 230 divided by 16 is 14.375. So 14.375 rems. And then the maximum, we'll say 1 FR, right? So this will basically give the grid column either a width of, 230 pixels, 14 rems minimum, or it could be all the way up to 1 FR. So it could theoretically take up the entire space of the row. And this is actually all you need. So let's kind of see what that does to our grid in the browser. So it looks the same on desktop. There's 4 items and they're all in the same row. And each item is currently 265 pixels. So that is between the min width of 230 pixels and obviously 1FR could be 100%. Let's see what happens when we take the browser width and we slowly reduce it. Okay, still 4. Okay, so now you can see it broke to 3 columns, and then there's 3 items on one row and then 1 item by itself on the second row. We'll just kind of keep going here. So now it's broken into 2 columns. And then for mobile, it is 1 column. And this is one of the great parts of Grid, where with simply one rule in the Grid parent, Grid template columns using repeat, auto fit, and min max, it created this 1 column, 2 column, 3 column, up to 4 column layout. So, this is pretty cool. Now, why did I mention that I'm not going to use this approach? Well, even though it is awesome that we can write this rule and create a multi-column layout without using any media queries, I know that in real life, if the design has 4 items and they want it in 1 row for desktop, they may not be super happy when you have a layout like this, where it looks uneven. And let me show you, let me kind of highlight that by hiding the grid lines. So we'll just pretend that there's lines around each of them. Let's do that. Article item, border, 1 pixel, solid, red. So this looks a little bit uneven. I think most people, if they want to show 4 items, they're not going to want it to look like this. It looks better when it's even and there's just 2, 2, and 2. And of course, it's fine when it's on mobile and it's just 1 column. But this in-between state is not really desirable, I would say. And unfortunately, that's just kind of the way, that's kind of what happens when you let Grid control, the number of columns using auto fit and then the width using the min-max function. So even though there's more rules, for the sake of kind of maintaining control over that grid, I'm going to go back to the media query thing. And for auto fit, I don't know if I explained that fully, but we go back to turning on the grid lines and then turning off the border. So for auto fit, what happens is it will fit the items as well as it can in the template. And the other option instead of auto fit is you could say auto fill, and they're very similar, but not quite the same. Let's see if we can see the difference here. Doesn't seem to be different for us, but let me just show you. There's a really good article on CSS tricks for auto fit, auto fill. Okay, yeah, Sarah Sweden. She wrote this great article comparing what auto fit and auto fill look like. So in this example, you can see auto fill will create the template, but it's not going actually all the way across, whereas auto fit will kind of try to fit the content to the row. And then if you go down a little bit more, I believe there's an animated example here. So if you look at this, the top one's auto fill. So you can see there's actually a blank column when you keep extending it out, whereas auto fit will, fit the existing content to the row. So that's auto fill and auto fit. Again, going back to our own website, I'm going to go back to the media queries just because I like having that extra layer of control. But this is also an option and it can definitely come in handy in other circumstances. Let's go back and we will delete this. And then we will uncomment. Control K, Control U. There we go. We'll save, go back to our site, and we're back here. There we go. Browser's a little slow sometimes. So 2 columns on tablet and 1 column on mobile. And then it goes back to 4 columns for desktop. So if that helps just kind of explaining sort of the basic, this is a fairly basic CSS grid layout using the grid template columns property. And then you can designate how many columns you want with the repeat function, and then also how what size each of the columns are. Let's get started now actually styling the content in the articles themselves. All right, now let's start styling the cards themselves. So we'll probably start with the image up here, and then we'll move on to the text elements. So using our little rectangle here, see that it's about 200 pixels tall. So let's go into our code editor and add those styles in. So this is going to be for the article image element. So down here, article image, we'll say height of 200 pixels. And we do need to use our calculator for that. So 200 divided by 16 is 12.5 rems. And then since these are also background images, let's add some of those background properties. So background size cover. So this will ensure that it will take up the entire div. Then background repeat, and I pretty much always turn repeat off. And then background position, center to make sure it's centered. I think those should be good for now. So let's check the site and see how that looks. Sweet, so the images are loading up. Looks like we forgot to add a gap in our grid parent properties. So let's do that. So if we go back up to the article grid, we'll add a gap of maybe 20 pixels. And 20 divided by 16 is 1.25 rems. So that looks pretty good. Let's actually compare that with the design. I think the gap might be a little bit more than that. Just more like 30 pixels. So 30 divided by 16 is 1.875. Okay. And I don't know if you noticed, but down here in the terminal, for some reason, it always throws an error when you start adding the gap property. I think there's just maybe a bug in the Live SAS extension, but if we rewatch it, then everything's fine and there's no errors. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's see, what else do we need to do here? Did I do the background? I think I did do the background for the whole section. Let's just turn off the lines for now. So after the image, we have the text here, and I'm going to make that a white background color since you can see in the design, this is what the text area has. So let's do that, and let's also add some padding. So let's see here. Looks like it's about 30. So let's see if it's the same on the bottom. Looks like it's a bit less on the bottom, but I might just make it 30 all the way around. And let's see what the horizontal padding is. Looks like it's less. It's about 25 on the sides and then 30 on top and bottom. And let's see what we got on mobile as well. Looks like it might be a little bit more on mobile. So the side padding on mobile is 30, I guess around 30. And then let's see what the bottom padding is. 44 on the bottom. And then it looks like it's less on the top. 30. So it looks like I might just make them all the same. 30 all the way around. Well, I guess on mobile should have a little bit more space on the bottom. Let's see if it's the same. Yeah, it looks like all these have much bigger bottom padding. So that's fine. We'll do maybe 40. So 40 on the bottom, and then the other sides will be 30 for mobile. And then on desktop, I believe it was 30 on top and bottom, and then 25 on the sides. Is that right? Yeah, around 30 for the top, and then 20, yeah, we'll do 25. Okay. This is going to be the article item element. We'll do the mobile padding first. So padding, oh, caps lock, padding. So it's going to be 30 divided by 16 and 1.875 rems. And then we'll do the same thing for everything except the bottom. And then the bottom is going to be, I think, did I say 40 rem or 40 pixels? 2.5 rems. There we go. Then we're going to do for, I guess, tablet, medium and desktop. We'll say padding, and I think we said 30 on top and bottom, and then 25 on the sides. 25 divided by 16, 1.5625. There we go. Okay, let's see what we got. Oh, I know why. The padding shouldn't be on the article item. It should be on the article text. So just for the text. That's okay. Let's fix that. Move the padding down there. There we go. That's much better. Okay, we also need to add a background color to the article text. Color, and I think white. Made a variable for that. Yeah. Okay, there we go. So, I mean, it's a little hard to see since it's a very light gray in the background, but that is what the styles are. And I believe there's also a border radius around the whole card. So you can see the corners are slightly rounded all the way around. So let's add a border radius. It doesn't look like it's very round, so I might do something like 5 pixels. So 5 divided by 16.3125. And we'll just do it all the way around. And one thing you need to keep in mind with border radius is that sometimes in order for the border radius to actually show up and sort of cut those corners, you need to add overflow. Yeah, overflow hidden. So that'll make sure that the actual rounded corners will show up. Cool, that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's do the text starting from the top, just working our way down. So the first part of this card text is the author section, and this looks like it's quite small. I'm gonna say, yeah, it's probably around 10, I would say 10 pixels tall. So let's do that. So here we go, author. Font size, it's gonna be 10 divided by 16, 0.625. I'm assuming it's gonna be the same for both mobile and tablet and desktop. Now let's move on to the title. And it looks like it's a darker gray and it is bigger. So about maybe 17 or 16. Let's do 17. So font size, 17 divided by 16, 1.0625. And then for the description, looks like it's bigger than 10 pixels since it's bigger than the author, but not too much. It's about 13. That's a bit small. 13 divided by 16 is 0.8125 rems. Okay, now let's see how that looks. Looks pretty good. Now, of course, we do need to do the colors. Right now, since I made the whole article item and anchor tag, it has that purple link color. So we'll adjust those. But size-wise, that looks fairly good. We might need to tweak the line height a little bit. But let's do those font colors. So it looks like the author and the description are the regular gray that, you know, we saw kind of up here. And the title is the same darker gray as the title up there. Let's do that. So since we have both author and description the same color, what I might do to make it slightly more efficient is in the article text, I'm going to add the color property there. And then I will make the different darker gray color for just the article title. So if we go into our variables, that sort of medium gray is probably this grayish blue. And then the darker gray is probably this dark blue color for the title. There we go. Okay. Okay, looking much closer. So let's now work with the spacing. So we need to add some space between the elements, and then we'll also adjust the line height on that title. Looks like it's a little bit too much, but first spacing. Okay, below the author is 16 pixels of spacing. That's 1 rem. So we'll add a margin bottom of 1 rem to the author. Then to the title, there's some space under that as well. Looks like it's a bit less, but honestly, I'm just going to say 16 as well. I think I'm being lazy. And then let's see what else we need to do. We need to adjust the line height of the title. And also we'll check the line height of the description as well. So right now, it seems like there's a little too much line height right here. So let's try something like line height. And I usually like to put the line height property under the font size property since they're kind of related. So 1.15 maybe? And I'm just kind of guessing here. A line height of 1 means it's the same as the font size. 1.15 means it's just a little bit taller than what the font size is. Okay, so that looks closer, which is good. That seems pretty good. Maybe just a tiny little bit more. So maybe 1.2. So 1.2. Okay. I think that's fairly close enough. So let's check out the line height for the description now. I think that's actually pretty close. Yeah, I think that's good enough. And it looks like the spacing that we have between the elements is okay as well. I feel like there's a bit less spacing here, so maybe we should make that a little bit smaller. So article title, go to the rules tab, and right now, I think I had set a margin bottom of 16 pixels or 1 rem. So let's adjust this. So 16 pixels is a little too big, so let's try 14. Looks much closer on the design, so maybe 10 pixels. Looks like it might be less than that actually. Maybe 8 pixels. Okay, let's do 8. I feel like there's less spacing under the author as well. Let's just copy this over first. Margin bottom of 8 pixels. Article title. 8 divided by 16 is 0.5 rems. Because I could have done the math, because 16 divided by 2 is 8. Anyway. And the author... I wonder what happens if we just do the same thing. 0.5 rems. It does look a bit better, I think. There's still a little bit more space under the author, so we'll just tweak that a bit. So instead of 8 pixels, let's say 10, maybe 12? 12 pixels. 12 divided by 16, 0.75 rems. So I think that looks all right. Okay, so I think our text is pretty good actually. So now let's add the proper images and copy for each of these articles. So in our index.html file, we will adjust that. Just copy these all over. Okay, so let's do the images. So in the design, it's the currency, then it's like a restaurant, then a plane with clouds, and then confetti. So restaurant, plane, confetti. We look in our images folder. Image restaurant. Oh, I had the name right. Restaurant, and then the second one was plane, and then confetti. All right, let's see how this looks. It looks pretty good. So if we take it down, it comes 2 columns, and then 1 column on mobile. This is pretty good. Not too shabby. So one extra thing that I'm going to add is some nice little hover states, and I think I'm also going to add a box shadow just to make the card a little more separate from the background. So let's add those in now. So the box shadow, I'm going to add to the article item itself since I want it to go kind of all the way around. So article item, say box shadow. And for box shadow, it takes a bunch of different parameters. So let me just type them in first and then explain what they are. Okay, so in box shadow, the first two numbers are the position of the shadow. So the first 0 pixels will control the horizontal position. So I want it to be probably in the center, so I'll leave that at 0 pixels. The second 0 pixels is the vertical position. And usually for shadows, it's better to make it a little bit down from the object itself, so it seems more like a real shadow. So we'll maybe adjust that to be 3 pixels. And I'll convert these to rems once we've kind of finalized everything. And the last number parameter is the spread. So it's kind of how diffuse versus how like hard line of a shadow it is. So I tend to do at least 10 pixels, maybe 12 pixels for the spread. And we can of course tweak that as we see fit. And then the last one is the color of the shadow. And for shadows, I usually like to use a semi-transparent shadow. So what I've done is use RGBA 000, which means black. And then the last number here is the alpha channel, meaning the opacity. And I've set that to 0.15, which means basically 15% opacity. So it's pretty transparent. Okay, so let's see how this looks. Ooh, there we go. So we got a nice shadow here. Okay, looks like we have some issues down here where the white doesn't go all the way down to the bottom. So I think we need to figure that out. So let's see what's going on here. Article item goes all the way down there. Article image and then article text. So it seems like because the text on the first two is shorter than the last two, because you can see there's only 4 lines for the first two in the description, but there's 5 lines for the description for the last two. That's why they're taller. So one thing I could do to fix that is maybe set the background color of article item white. So now it's like that. So let me try moving the background color to the article item instead of the article text. See if that fixes the issue. Let's do it here. Okay, much better. Good. Let's make sure everything looks okay even when we're changing the width. Okay. All right. Good. Now the next thing we want to do is I'm actually going to add a little hover state. So it just looks nice, you know, when there are these little, I guess you can call micro interactions. So the website kind of responds to the different actions you take. So I want this to change in some way when I hover over each card. And one thing I do a lot is scale it up slightly when you hover over it. So let's try adding that. And we'll do that to the entire article item as well. So we'll add the hover selector. And on hover, we want to transform. And we'll increase the size by using scale. And then in the scale function, we can set what we want it to scale to. Scale of 1 means 100%, so it won't change at all. So we want it to be slightly more than 100%, but not too much. So maybe 1.05. So that would be 105%. So we're only increasing by 5%. So let's try that and see how that looks. Okay, so it is just a bit larger. And we also need to add a transition so it's a bit smoother as well. So transition, we'll just say all, maybe 150 milliseconds, and then ease in out. That controls the smoothness and the speed of the animation. So let's try this now. Ooh, smooth like butter. I like that. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay. So I think we can actually consider this section done. It looks good on mobile. Obviously on actual mobile, there's no real hover state, but that's fine. Tablet, 2 columns. Desktop, 4 columns. All right, so I think we can consider this section complete. And that was the blog post article section. What did you think about how we used CSS Grid to make it responsive? you have any feedback, questions, or other comments, you can always leave them down below. And as always, thanks for watching and keep on coding.